Diane Abbott has been suspended from the Labour Party for the second time. Reason being is due to her comments on racism. Diane Abbott has been suspended from the Labour Party for a second time after saying she did not regret her past remarks on racism, as Keir Starmer once again attempted to reassert his grip over his backbenchers. The veteran MP faces an investigation over her defence of remarks more than 2 years ago that people of colour experienced racism all their lives, which was different from the prejudice experienced by Jewish people, Irish people, and travellers. Now, if you don't remember the first time Diane was suspended after she talked about the hierarchy of racism, that people of colour will experience people of colour will experience racism differently to Jewish people and travellers, as racism based on skin colour is more apparent. Now, this was in a letter written to The Observer. However, the controversial part was where she compared being Jewish to having ginger hair. That comment raised eyebrows. Clearly, that was an ill-judged comment on an otherwise very salient point. She then later apologised. But in an interview on Radio 4, she said she had no regrets about her past comments.
You got into terrible trouble for a letter you wrote to The Observer about racism, and you appeared to suggest, in the view of some of your critics anyway, that the kind of anti-Semitism that the Jewish community suffered, or travellers suffered, or Irish people suffered, was somehow different from the racism that you as a young black person had suffered. You were suspended and there was a great hoo-ha. Do you look back on that with regret?
No, not at all. Clearly, there must be a difference between racism, which is about colour, and other types of racism, because you can see a traveller or a Jewish person walking down the street. You don't know. You don't know unless you stop to speak to them or you're in a meeting with them. But if you see a black person walking down the street, you see straight away that they're black. They are different types of racism.
So here's the thing, right? Diane is so right about the hierarchy of racism, and not just in terms of skin colour. Anti-Semitism is taken seriously. Even the most right-wing racist knuckleheads pretend to care about anti-Semitism, whereas anti-brown racism, Islamophobia, is completely normalised. But that doesn't mean her comment about anti-Semitism and people having ginger hair is the same. So I'm a little bit confused as to why she doubled down after apologising. Now, she has been a firebrand in fighting racism, and I don't want to see her legacy tarnished by saying some clumsy stuff. Having said that, she could just be referring to her comments about the hierarchy of racism, in which she is absolutely right to say she has no regrets. Now, I thought this was a very good clip from Ollie Dugmore explaining the hierarchy of racism on Victoria Derbyshire.
Fair-minded British people would accept the spirit of what she was trying to say, which is that if you were present as an ethnic minority, you experience racism differently. It's not to say that Jewish people don't experience racism. It's not to say that Irish people don't experience racism. But if your skin is a different colour to other people, the way that that racism manifests against you is different. And I think most fair-minded people would accept that.
Kevin, what's your thoughts on this? I mean, do you think it's particularly noteworthy that a man in Keir Starmer not too long ago said, "We're an island of strangers," and has suspended a black woman MP for the second time on the issue of racism?
Yeah, I mean, it's ludicrous that Keir Starmer, having virtually quoted Enoch Powell, like you say, quite recently, and having been ramping up the rhetoric about immigration consistently in order to try and appeal to reform voters and, let's be honest, fascists throughout the country, it is now picking up on this minor little nitpick of a point. And I think that's precisely what it is, because as you elucidated and as Ollie Dugmore did very well, I think, on the Victoria Derbyshire show, that her point is basically correct, that unless you knew that somebody was either Jewish or of Romany traveller stock, you wouldn't necessarily know that they were anything different to you whatsoever. But whereas a person who is visibly black or Asian, BAME, you obviously does suffer that kind of interpersonal racism much more extensively throughout their life, because there's no way of hiding that. It's the old nonsense about when Black Lives Matter gets brought up and people say, well, what about police lives? Well, police lives aren't lives, are they? a police officer chooses to be a police officer, and at the end of his shift, he takes his uniform off and he's just a civilian again. A black person can't take their skin off. They're always a black person. So clearly, the way in which they experience racism is very different. And I think it's a nitpick because she wasn't absolutely clear about what part of the previous negative letter thing that she wrote, the original controversy from 2 years ago, she was referring to when she said she had no regrets. But it's pretty obvious that having apologized for the very, very silly thing she said about anti-Semitism being the same as having ginger hair, which is obviously wrong and stupid, and I think she accepted that and apologized for it. I don't think she's going back on that, especially when the then follow-on point to that is exactly the point that I and Ali Dogmore and yourself have elucidated here. So this is clearly an extension of the doubling down and tripling down of going after the left within the Labour Party. That's what's taking place here. In addition to the 4 MPs, the 4 further MPs who were had the whip removed from them this week for being left-wing with violent intent or something. I don't know exactly. The Labour Party have thought to themselves, the recent trouble they've had isn't because they're too right-wing, it's because they're not right-wing enough, because that's the Morgan McSweeney playbook. Just be more and more right-wing, and then hopefully the things will happen and things will change. And that's ultimately, I think, the reason that they're definitely going to lose the next election, because in order to have any chance of having re-electability come 2028 or 2029, they were going to have a change, a massive change. The benefits rebellion and debacle could have been that moment. They could have decided to change and become an actual Labour Party and maybe win some of those voters back. And they decided, no, they're just going to continue with the same process. And so they're going to become even more and more unpopular and lose further MPs as they become disenfranchised and lose the whip. And eventually it'll whittle down what was a very significant majority into not a very workable one at all. And Keir Starmer will go down as a massively unsuccessful Prime Minister.
I mean, do you think that the response to even this, right, is an example of the hierarchy of racism? Because I feel like that had Diane Abbott, or maybe it wasn't Diane Abbott, somebody else, particularly a white MP, had made a clumsy comment about a different race that wasn't Jewish people, that there wouldn't be this kind of uproar. But a black woman says something in conversation about anti-Semitism, there's like it's gone through with a fine tooth comb, and the boot is there, stamped down really quickly. Do you think that Diane Abbott being suspended for the second time is in of itself an example of the hierarchy of racism?
Yeah, I think it is, absolutely. I certainly think the way in which the media have treated her ever since she got into politics got into Parliament back in the 1980s. Remarkably, the first black female MP ever, which is crazy when you consider that happened, I think it was right the year I was born, which is absolutely insane to think. But she's been treated very differently. If you notice the way in which, say, Boris Johnson, a white privileged upper class man, has been virulently, horrifically racist in any number of ways. We can all go through the litany of black post boxes and all the rest of it, all his horrible anti-migrant rhetoric he's had over the course of time. Describing Africans as pickaninnies with watermelon smiles, I believe was a phrase. And he went on to become not just the mayor of London, but then an MP 2 different times in 2 different places, and then Prime Minister. So clearly there are some things you are allowed to be racist about and some things you are not. And I think actually, not to make everything about Israel-Palestine, but I think it's a pertinent juxtaposition here. The way in which anti-Semitism is involved in that conversation shows that certainly powers in the Western world are very, very sensitive to anti-Semitism, whereas anti-Muslim sentiment is rampant. It's throughout the entirety of Western politics and media in a way that various people, even conservatives, have pointed out over the course of time, because that kind of racism is just tolerated. So clearly there is a hierarchy where some racism is bad. Not all racism is to be condemned or even to be stopped by the political elites.
Yeah, I agree with you. I don't think you can actually separate the West's support for Israel and the way anti-Semitism is viewed in this country, right? The smears of anti-Semitism against those who are not being anti-Semitic, or the accusations of anti-Semitism when you criticize Israel, I think it fundamentally goes to the top, right? If we were in a situation where it was flipped, Palestine was the establishment, Israel was the occupied force, and we stood behind Palestine, I could see that Islamophobia would be taken seriously, anti-Semitism wouldn't be taken as seriously. I mean, would you agree with that assessment? I think it's probably what you kind of said.
Yeah, pretty much, yeah. And actually, I think it's worse in other places. It's sort of ironic that that Starmer met with Chancellor Merz of Germany this week, because in Germany it's especially sensitive, obviously for historical reasons. Anti-Semitism is cracked down upon it with ruthlessness. Even when it's not actually anti-Semitism, it's just anti-Zionism or protest against Israel in any way whatsoever. Whereas you have the AfD, an openly and avowedly Islamophobic political party, which is becoming the largest of the political parties and taking over state governments, and very possibly at some point will become the largest party in a governing coalition at some point, potentially. And that's just tolerated. Though, if you had a virulently anti-Semitic party, it quite rightly would be shut down by the German government. An anti-Islam party, an anti-Muslim party, in a country that has a significant Muslim population, let's not forget, those Muslim population, their viewpoint and their safety is not taken into account, because apparently in that instance, democracy trumps people's safety for some reason.
So Diane Abbott was one of the people of the so-called Labour left, it's always ever shrinking, among John McDonnell and some other people, said they wouldn't join this this Jeremy Corbyn Zara Sultana party, right? I mean, that's probably changed now. I mean, first of all, do you think that Diane Abbott will return to the party? Do you think they'll finally expel her? Because clearly they wanted to rid the left. And do you think she'd potentially join this party?
I think she's done now in the Labour Party. This is among explaining that this is about the hierarchy of racism and the fact that she, as a black woman, is treated differently than white men are. This is a settling of an old score. They wanted to do this, and they tried to do this before last year's general election, but because of sort of bizarrely a wave of sympathy based on how horrifically she'd been treated, they had to take her back into the fold. And so essentially they've just waited and bided their time and done the hit job now, because they've got a vague scintilla of a kernel of something they can grab onto and use as the excuse to do the thing they always wanted to do in the first place, which was get rid of her as quickly as possible. Whether she's changed and wants to be part of the Jeremy Corbyn thing, who knows? I mean, you've got to bear in mind age and longevity, right? Both Corbyn and Abbott have been in Parliament a very long time. Are they really the people you want fronting a new thing? To a degree, yes, because they've got name recognition. But to a degree, you also need, younger blood like Zara Sultana coming through as well. So whether she wants to be involved in that or not, who knows? But ultimately, they need to get their act together. This political party, if it was going to happen, needed to have happened already. The fact that they're now dilly-dallying and announcing things when they've got nothing ready to go, and they're not even a registered political party yet. They don't have a name. They don't have any policy basis. Get your act together, lads. This is either worth doing or it's not.
I also think Diane Abbott is in a unique position which she finds herself in, where none of the Labour left find themselves in. Like, she actually, I wouldn't say allies, but has sympathy with those across the political spectrum, right? Because I think because she's the first black woman MP, that there is some kind of respect she garners from people who wouldn't otherwise give any socialist respect. John McTernan has defended Diane Abbott in the past. He defended her again. He said, leave her alone. So I think she does have that kind of safety cushion, but I think I agree they're going to finally get rid of her. And also in terms of this new party, I think she's standing down in the next election, but maybe as just sort of a campaigning tool, she could get behind it.
Yeah, I mean, she could still join the party and be an electioneering asset. Yeah, absolutely, yeah.
Support independent media, support social justice that's there on social media. Thank you. Turn left.